Well, hello there. My name is Matt Lebon. I'd like to welcome you to the Foodscaper Podcast, where we dig into the growing profession of foodscaping, one conversation at a time. These are folks who have turned their passion into a profession, designing, installing, and maintaining food-producing ecological landscapes for clients for a living.
For us, it was, are you kidding me? You're going to try to have a business like putting in vegetable gardens for people? That doesn't seem like something that should be a business.
Get ready to dig into some rich conversations. Let's get growing. A big thanks to our podcast sponsors, Epic Gardening and Stark Brothers Nursery. Thank you both so much. Thrilled to have Colin McCrate with us here, the founder and lead farmer at the Seattle Urban Farm Company. Colin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is an exciting opportunity for us at the Foodscaper because, as you might imagine, we are just huge fans of everything that you've done at the Seattle Urban Farm Company to really create the vision for what this industry can be, to put the word company at the end of urban farm. Tell us a little bit about Seattle. What does it mean to be in Seattle for those who don't know much about that city, both geographically and socioeconomically, maybe?
Yeah, totally. Boy, so Seattle's a great place to live and work. The interesting thing about Seattle is it's pretty far north, but because we're on the coast, we have a maritime climate, which means it never gets super hot and never gets super cold. So from like a growing standpoint, it's pretty nice because you can grow year round. With enough planning, you can usually keep things alive through the winter. So we have a relatively early planting season. We start spring planting in March because we pretty much never have snow on the ground. It is like an interesting place to work, I guess, socioeconomically, in that it's like a pretty pricey city. It's like a big tech hub, and that's only increased, in the last 5 or 10 years. People who grew up here will say it's not the same city that they grew up in. Like, it used to be a small town. Now it's a big city, and there's a lot of tech money. There's a benefit there, like working, in that there's a lot of people with disposable income. They can invest in things like their landscape, and they want to do that. So it provides opportunity for a business like ours, but it also makes it expensive paying salaries to employees. Like, all of our costs are just very high.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because those two things are always in balance. If you're in a really small town, then it's very likely that you may not carry those same costs. Tell us a little bit about Seattle Urban Farm Company. What's the origin story and what are the services that you offer?
Oh my. All right. I'll do my best to be concise and somewhat interesting.
Yeah.
We started in 2007, which feels like a million years ago at this point. At that time, there weren't many businesses doing what we had hoped to do. And so it's been interesting trying to like carve out a space for ourselves, like in those early days. It'd be interesting to know other people that are doing work like this now, like what the reaction is when they first launch their business in the town that they're in, like how surprising it is to people. Because for us, it was, are you kidding me? You're going to try to have a business like putting in vegetable gardens for people? That doesn't seem like something that should be a business. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it was like a feel-good story. So one of the things about Seattle is it does have a very like progressive and environmentally aware culture. So gardening has always been a big deal in Seattle. Like ornamental landscaping is a big deal, but so is foodscaping and having an edible garden. So my specific background, I worked on production vegetable farms for a while. And I was in this period where I would spend the growing season working on a farm. And then in the winter, when there was like, obviously like at a lot of farms, you get laid off in the winter, there's not work to do. And there's not always like a budget to keep people around. So I would do landscaping in the city. And that seemed like the closest thing that I could find to what I was interested in. I like landscaping. For me, it's all about plants. I focus on edibles, but I just love plants. I guess I'm a botanist more than anything else. So doing that, we were just doing ornamental landscaping during the winter. I just had this idea. I was like, this is cool, but what if like we could do this, but focus on growing food? And the feedback I got was that's just not a thing you can do. Like the people that want to grow food do that themselves. Yep. They'll hire us to prune their trees, to mow their lawn. But if they're interested in food, they're not going to hire somebody to do that. And I guess I was curious if that was true. So, with little planning, I spun up this idea. I started growing transplants in my backyard. Like, I made the world's jankiest greenhouse, like a PVC greenhouse with painter's plastic wrapped over it from Home Depot. And then I got myself a booth at the farmer's market in my neighborhood. I started telling people I have a business where, where I can build you a vegetable garden. And surprisingly, people decided to start hiring me. So then I had to figure out how to actually do it. The culture of Seattle was receptive to it. There were people ready for it. Homeowners who were, hey, this is cool. We've actually wondered if there was a business that did this and we could never find anybody. So no matter where you're at, that's the thing to keep in mind, is just because one person says that's not practical, that's not a good idea, that doesn't mean there's not going to be enough other people who say it's a great idea that actually want to support you and work with you. So we found that out early on. And we were really lucky, I think, to just have work immediately. And that sort of just allowed us to start rolling, because there wasn't this like long period of we want to do this, but we don't know how to get started. Honestly, like in a lot of ways, just really lucked out. It was 2007, I think, was really like near the beginning of when like broadly people started talking about local food instead of just organic food. That was also a moment in time where it was like the local food concept was just something more people were talking about. And I think we just slotted right into that. And then we just were able to slowly build. The second part of your question, over the years, our services have changed, and we can get into the details of this, but we started doing really simple vegetable gardens. And then we slowly started to scale up into bigger landscapes, like bigger projects, at which point we brought in like a designer and had a design process, like a formal design process, and then like a installation process. And then after that, like the opportunity for people to have a maintenance program. And that's been like the backbone of our business ever since. And we've spun up other things like garden coaching. We've done a lot of lecturing, and we wrote these books. And now we're like focusing also on garden product development. But yeah, doing like a design, installation, maintenance service, really structured similarly to any traditional landscaping business, I'd say is like the core of what Seattle Urban Farm Company has been.
Yeah, I'm super fascinated to dive into that more, because that is less of what you all put out publicly, it would appear. And I'm so much more familiar, at least personally, with all of your educational materials, your podcast, and the stuff that I see on social media, and less about, we have this client facing part of the business. I want to pick back up on our story. You are out at the farmer's market, you're growing plants, you're putting in these gardens. And at that point, are you by yourself? Do you have trucks? How are you making all that work?
Yeah, great question. I started the business with zero money, essentially. I was in my 20s. On a certain level, I didn't care if I succeeded or failed. I didn't feel like I had much to lose. I just wanted to see if I could do it. And that was like a pretty fortunate place to be coming from at the moment. So essentially, I took the car that I had, I sold it, bought a truck. So that was like my one asset. So I just had a truck. That was my personal and business vehicle. At the farmer's market, you pay basically a percentage of the sales that you do. At the farmer's market I was at, so pretty low lift. Again, if I went with a bunch of P starts and only sold $100 worth of starts, they were only going to charge me $10 or something. Okay. So again, it was like I could waste my Saturday and nothing could happen, or I could just be out there and there wasn't a lot of risk involved. But I met people at the farmer's market. They were like, come out to our house. We want to put in a garden. I went out there, basically helped them pick a site. It was like a very simple garden. Like a lot of the early gardens I built weren't even framed raised beds. They were just mounded raised beds in the ground. So essentially a lot of it was about like, let's remove what's here. Let's amend the soil. Let's put in a drip irrigation system. And then I can start planting for you. Like the simplest type of gardening, I guess you can do in terms of like cost and infrastructure. And because I happened to just get lucky, here's another thing that I did that I think really helped early on. Somebody just recommended this. They were like, hey, write a press release. I was like, okay. So I just was like, how do you write a press release? I looked it up. I just wrote a couple paragraphs. It had some ridiculous headline like Urban Farming Company takes root in Seattle. And I sent it to every environmental and garden columnist in the region. Just maybe somebody will just want to talk to me. And in one of the newspapers at the time, Seattle had two daily newspapers, and basically the environmental columnist just picked up the article and was like, "Hey, I'm going to come and take photos of you and write about what you're doing." And then they put the article on the front page of the newspaper. Yeah, no, it was hilarious. I was like, that, and it didn't even make any sense. I was like, okay, people just wanted a story that was like, hey, this is fun. This feels good. Let's have a feel good story today. Unfortunately, that just happened to be about what I was doing. So then I started getting more calls, and I was lucky in that, like, one of my best friends, Brad Holm, who I've known since college, he was managing a CSA in Pennsylvania at the time, but he's ready to move to a new project. So he was as knowledgeable or more than I about vegetable growing. And I convinced him to come out, basically. I was like, I'm starting this business. Why don't you come and like partner with me? He said yes. Fortunately, he came out across the country from Pennsylvania. Then it was just the two of us that finished the first season. And by the second season, 2008, we started basically bringing on a crew to help us.
Wow. So fast scale up there. I want to hear more about scaling up, but I'm really curious, and you can talk about your own reflection with this. Were you charging for those consultations and bids that you were giving? Because in the beginning, when I think back to getting started with all this, even though it's just raised beds or maybe just in-ground gardens, like the prospect of spending my time going out to a client's house, doing the consultation, coming back and doing the scary part, which is getting them a design, some mock-up of a scaled garden, and then writing out the contractual language to actually make this something that I'm accountable to, that took me forever. And I'm curious about your process with that. Were you charging? Do you charge for that now? And what do you think the sweet spot is?
It's a very good question. So early on at the beginning, I was not charging for any of that. And to be honest, it was just because I wasn't sure if I had anything of value to offer people. Like, I was learning on the go. I was very disorganized. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have, honestly, like the full confidence that I could even deliver on the stuff that I was saying I could deliver on. And so I felt more comfortable just taking all that on as a learning opportunity. It's like the last thing I wanted to do was to start charging people for something and then not give them anything. Because I was like, for me, since day one, and this is still really like part of our like real business strategies, is like all about our reputation. I would rather personally, for the long run, take a hit on something I'm doing one day or 1 week, especially if I don't really know what I'm doing, if it helps me maintain the relation, like the respect that our business has and that, you know, what people expect out of us. So for me, that's always been, is like our reputation is like the top priority. Eventually, once we started having a lot more interest, there's more people who want us to work with them than we can possibly handle. Once you get to a place where you're busy and doing consultations is going to like take you away from something else that you would be earning money doing, and or you find, and this is probably what everybody finds, is that some people are really just wasting your time because it's a free consultation. Like, why not have somebody come out and spend an hour or whatever talking to them? So we did start charging $100 basically, which, to your point, doesn't even really cover your time. By the time you think about, I'm emailing these people, I'm driving to their house, I'm talking to them, I'm driving back, I'm writing a bunch of stuff up, it doesn't come close to covering the costs. It was really just like a tactic to say, are you serious about doing this?
Yeah.
If you'll pay me $100, there's a good chance, as long as you don't think I'm a complete moron, that you'll hire me. And at least I won't be totally wasting my time. This was another reason we really started doing a formal design process. It really helped us capture a lot more costs, in that it was like we could charge for the consultation. And then immediately after the consultation, there was like, if you want to do anything else, we're going to have a design phase and you have to pay for the design. So we're going to spend time actually drawing it up, figuring exactly out what we're going to do, all the materials, the exact dimensions. So you get a design deliverable, you know what you're getting, but you're paying for that. And we could really like bake in the time we needed to estimate the installation costs during that. So at that point, we were capturing a lot more of the time and of the costs. And then it also helped people take us more seriously, And it helped open up more opportunities for interesting projects. In that, if you're like hand drawing something really simple, or like in the beginning, I wasn't even drawing anything. You can only do something so complex. People aren't going to let you come in and say like, "Hey, let me tear your whole yard apart. I have a vision in my head." That's like a pretty tough sell. But if you're like, here's a design document, this is what you're getting. Here's like a list of the plants where like the perennials are going to go. Here's the materials we're using to build the raised beds and the retaining walls or whatever you're doing. Then you'll be able to get those types of jobs.
So let's say somebody's got 4 raised beds along their fence and it's just grass right now, and they want 4 beds. They're all 3x8. What process does that client have? Do they have to go into the design phase? And do they have to pay for a design?
Yeah, but it's a much lower cost. If something's very simple, then it just takes a lot less time to design it. Another caveat is what I'm describing right now is maybe what I should call like peak SUFCO, peak Seattle Urban Farm Company, like services business. One thing we should talk about is we have scaled back some of this. But when the business was at its largest and its most profitable, had the most employees, this is what we were doing. Every single client would go through a design phase. For some clients, it would be like several $1,000s and, it'd take a week or two to finalize. For some people, it would be hundreds of dollars and crank it out in a couple hours. But it just was easier to have everybody go through the same sales funnel.
Yeah, I'm curious about any other really important learning opportunities that you want to share that really primed you for leading this movement within the company and in Seattle. You said you worked on farms, you did landscaping in the winter. I've seen a bunch of videos about you building beds and things like that. Is there other formative educational experiences that are important in terms of just laying down the foundation that was ultimately leading to your growth?
Honestly, fundamentally, I think I've always just been like an environmentalist.
Yeah.
Like that was my primary concern of I think people should take care of the environment. I think it's crazy that we don't. And I want to find a way to do something that's helpful. So when I was in college, I basically studied environmental science. And the program I was in was exclusively policy based. And it's just not something that I can do. I ended up moving out while I was in college to this. The best thing you could call it is like a hippie commune. It was just like off the grid cabins in the woods, huge gardens. And I was like, oh, this is my vibe. This is what I want to be doing. And the cool thing about this place is we had a lot of connections with local farmers. So to me, it was, like maybe growing food like sustainably and organically is like a thing that I can do that's going to help. That's like people eating that food rather than industrialized food that comes from super far away. And because I was really interested in plants, I was studying environmental science and like focusing on botany, essentially. I just became obsessed with that idea, more or less. I just read books constantly, and I just tried to like work on as many different interesting farms as I could. In a way, working on farms is very challenging because it's hard to find positions. It's certainly hard to make a living. But I guess the flip side of that is when you're young, like getting kicked off of your job every 6 months is helpful if you're skill building, because then you can go somewhere different and learn from somebody different. And as far as like insights go, I was working on a farm for some people that I really respected, but it was obvious that it was like really hard for them to make it work financially because it was a vegetable farm. And that's the story of having a vegetable farm. I had this moment of really what I want to do is just grow food. And I don't think I can do that the traditional way. What's another way I might be able to do it? And I think, honestly, just by having the landscaping job, that's what provided me with the thought of, hey, maybe there's something here. What I really wanted to do was break my reliance of like income on the dollar value of the food that I was growing. I try to basically frame the entire proposition differently. Like, it's not about growing $2,000 in vegetables at your home. It's about the experience. It's about like a life experience, a lifestyle, your health, and things like that. And it's not about, hey, you charged me this much money this year, but I only got this many leeks. That doesn't seem like a good bargain. That's not what we're selling to people. And for me, that was like the goal of the business, was to like separate those two ideas.
Totally. I I think that's a great way of communicating it, that gardening is just another hobby like yoga or running or whatever that gives you so many different returns, including, of course, the food and the spiritual nourishment and the connection to the seasons and fun things to talk about with your neighbors and trade and getting back to something so sacred and so pre-money. Being a foodscaper requires a ton of knowledge about each plant and their needs. It can feel intimidating to learn all those little details. Kevin Espiritu and the team at Epic Gardening offer an amazing library of educational tools and videos to help you master your craft. From caring for hardy kiwi to companion planting tips, Epic Gardening is one of my favorite YouTube channels to follow for expanding my edible plant knowledge. We're excited to partner with Epic Gardening as the official garden supply sponsor of the Foodscaper Podcast. Deepen your foodscaping plant knowledge and shop for products at shop.epicgardening.com. If you're just starting your edible landscaping business and finding the admin work tedious and confusing, we have a toolkit that will save you time, money, and stress. This is our Foodscaper Business Starter Pack, an online resource created specifically for the foodscaping industry. The starter pack includes our budgeting and bidding spreadsheet, client email and contract templates, and a map of a client's journey from that first hello to the final invoice. If I had these tools when I was starting, it would have freed me up to grow my business so much more quickly. So check out the Foodscaper Starter Pack at foodscaper.com and start growing today. Let's circle back to what you talked about, this whole scaling up process. I'm fascinated to hear that story.
So here's how the story goes. I started by myself doing simple vegetable gardens. Then Brad came on. We were essentially doing the same thing, simple vegetable gardens. By the second season, we were doing slightly bigger projects, like rather than just 2 or 3 raised beds, maybe. Because Seattle's very hilly, we started having to build like short retaining walls, putting in pathways because that's what people wanted. So like some hardscaping. Things started to just come into our repertoire because the projects demanded those things. So after a season or 2 of that, we essentially had an installation crew and a maintenance crew. And so there was a crew of people that went out and every day they were building a new garden. And then there was a separate group of people and their entire job was just going out to all the existing gardens and taking care of them. Essentially, we created this sales funnel. We were really fortunate in that we had tons of inbound inquiries all the time, just because we'd gotten our name out there. It was easy to find us on the internet. If you started looking for food garden Seattle or whatever, we would pop up because we were the only ones doing it. And so I would go out basically and do the sales, do consultations, then hand projects over to we had a designer. The designer would work with the clients through the design phase, then give the designs to the installation lead who would come up with the quote for building it. If they said yes to that, we would get a deposit from them, usually for 50% of the project costs. Then we would go into our schedule, we'd go build the garden. And if they wanted, obviously no one's forced to have a maintenance program, but it's here's what it would cost to have us come and do maintenance on your garden. For most residential projects, we do that bi-weekly. But for bigger bi-weekly meaning every other week. For larger gardens, we go weekly. For some of our really big gardens, like corporate gardens and things like that, we go twice a week. But early on, almost all of our projects were residential. We were always building gardens. And that was another advantage to being here in the Pacific Northwest is we can work all year. Like even in January, it's raining a lot of times and people are just wearing full rain gear. There's a lot of mud. It's not super pleasant, but it's not frozen. The more installations we did, the more chance we had to have more maintenance clients. Basically, the installation program feeds the maintenance program.
Yeah.
They were both just growing. And so at a certain point, I think we maxed out around 22 employees.
22. Okay.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I want to dive deeper into is the handoffs that you were having, which seems like there's several what we call at Custom Foodscaping a handoff is the management of the project goes from one person to the other. So you're out there doing the sales, you're painting the vision for the client, but then what is the process like of meeting with your designer and being like, here's what I saw, and here's everything you need to do your job? Because I feel like the level of documentation and specificity needed there is so different than if you're doing the design yourself, where it's all in your head. Do you have a protocol for getting the designer set up for success?
That's a great question. We would try to do as much gathering before we went to. Usually, like a request would come in through email. If it sounded like an interesting project or like a particularly big project, I'd try to schedule a phone call with those people.
Mm.
And if that worked out and it seemed like they were on board and understood what we were all about, like for a big project, say we're going to go and do like a design of someone's front yard or their entire property, usually on those calls, like I would go with the designer.
Yeah.
It was like the smaller projects that I would usually go solo. But even during the handoff, I would be like, here's my notes. Here are my pictures. Here are the things I told them we could do. There's wiggle room here because obviously no designer wants to just be told like, hey, draw exactly what I want you to draw. There's like creativity there and they want to be able to do their job and have it be interesting. So it was a lot of conversation, honestly, working in the office together. It got to a point where like my only job was to be in the office and to do sales calls. So I was not out. Sometimes I would go out and check in on installations. But once we got to a place where I really trusted our installation leads, I didn't need to do that very often. So it was really like working with the designer was a huge part of my job.
Yeah. When you look back on your scaling up there, how did you know you could hire and grow? Did you operate with any kind of lens or advice, or were you looking at financials? How did you determine that?
Probably not in a very logical or coherent way. We were operating from a place where we couldn't get all the work done. I need to hire someone else. Okay, like now that person has too much to do. Maybe we need to hire someone else. So it was very incremental like that.
Yeah.
We didn't go out and just say, hey, we expect to grow our gross revenue by $300,000 this year. So I'm just going to go and hire 4 people and they're going to have these roles. And then it was always, we hired people as we needed them, as it became obvious that there was enough work and the people that we had on staff like couldn't get anything else done beyond what they were already doing.
Yeah, it feels much more organic. I'm curious more about that growth. So it seems like you developed out of just the raised bed garden company into a full service landscaping company. Is that right?
Yeah. So we would never go and do a project that was somebody just, hey, I want a new ornamental landscape. We definitely drew a line there. But if they were coming into the heart or the focus of the project was their edible garden, which could be a combination of raised beds and perennials, trees, herb gardens, berry bushes, whatever, then we would take on the other elements as long as we felt like we could do them, which usually included hardscaping, retaining walls, maybe like arbors. And maybe this is a good time to talk about scaling back. I hadn't really considered like the things I was good at or the things I wanted to be doing. We were just taking things on as they came to us and more or less saying, hey, like we could figure that out. We can do that. And that's work. That's money. Let's try to get it done. But the reality is I'm a plant person. I'm not a construction person. I'm not skilled at construction. There's a lot of things I just don't know how to do. And so what happened to me was I became really reliant on having really autonomous and talented construction leads that could do things that I couldn't do. I could make decisions at jobs that I couldn't make. The reason, honestly, that we started scaling back was I worked myself into this place where I was like, I feel like I'm running a construction business rather than a gardening business. And we can keep growing this way. I could bring on another crew lead. We could have another like crew going out there and doing these installations. But anytime like one of these people quits, I am totally screwed, basically, because I can't step in and do that job. If I have a farmer, like a maintenance gardener quit, it's not pleasant, but like we can go do the work. But if we're in the middle of a big installation and there's an excavator on site and this, that, and the other thing, and all these materials coming in, somebody walks away or has some other opportunity come up, or, breaks up with their girlfriend or whatever, which seems to be the reason that people leave more than anything else, it's going to be really problematic for me and for our business. And I think it just made me really pause and reflect and be like, that maybe just isn't the right direction to be taking the company.
Yeah,
And maybe I should think about what I'm good at and what I want to be doing and try to take the company in that direction.
so does that mean you've taken it in a place where you're doing less builds and more maintenance, and now you can sit back on the fact that you've built up this huge maintenance portfolio?
Yes. So we scaled way back on installations. Two reasons you don't see them on Instagram. One is we do a lot fewer. And the other reason is because we have 3 kids at home, we can't get out and do social media videos at our projects. Basically, like, the reason that our social media is solely focused on our home garden is that's the only place we can do content creation. It would be way better to be able to get out there, but you can imagine going all around town, getting to a garden to film something and then come back is not the best use of time. So we've had to make a compromise there. But essentially, like, we do a lot less installations. We just focus almost exclusively on maintenance. And we're fortunate in that we have 15 years of installations that we've built. And we're also fortunate, and I don't know how this works out in other markets, but essentially building in edible gardens has become something that a lot of companies do now. Like, even traditional landscaping companies, they will build an edible garden part of the project for someone, but no one else offers like the maintenance program that we offer.
Yeah.
Or certainly no one in our area offers it in the way that we do. And so gardens come to us that have been designed and built by other companies. And between that and all the installations that we've done to date, we can continue growing the maintenance program.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely valuable insight for all the foodscapers and aspiring foodscapers in larger markets. It's possible to even grow, maybe even start your own maintenance only business. You're just networking and picking up existing clients who have gardens, and maybe you're networking a lot with landscape companies and saying, hey, y'all, like, you can build the boxes, like, I'll help your clients grow the vegetables, and then those relationships form. I have a very similar story to you in that I worked on farms and I was not interested, nor did I have the money to go buy a farm and live rurally by myself before I had a family. So it was basically this whole equation of like, how do I stay in the city, grow food for a living, stay connected to the plants that I love, and not have to have like farm life that I know isn't really serving what I need from a lifestyle perspective. I think you present a really compelling case for just learning on vegetable farms. Those opportunities are always going to be there. College farms, apprenticing on vegetable farms, just your own garden, and then parlaying those skills into educational ones where you can either work for a company like Seattle Urban Farm Company or start your own maintenance only company and not have to deal with all of this construction stuff that was off mission for you in terms of your own alignment and how you want to spend your time.
No, absolutely. I think one of the things I've been thinking about is, like, leading up to this interview was that's certainly where I was coming from. And I'm sure there are people interested in foodscaping that are really business focused, and maybe they want to be like the admin and creating a huge business around it and hiring people to do all these roles. And maybe there are some people that are really good at construction that also are really interested in food. And so those are like skill sets that they have or they want to develop. But for me, certainly it was about just like, the plants are the only thing that I can do well, and work myself into a place away from that. But I absolutely think that you're right. In a large market like Seattle or some other large city, with enough networking, and I think like you can never do enough networking in the landscaping industry and nursery industry and just getting your name out there, like, work is available for food gardeners.
Yes. Yeah, it's an exciting time in that sense. I hope that it is good enough work from a pay perspective that people can actually make a living and maybe even contribute meaningfully to their family. And that is where I'd love to take our conversation a little bit, is understanding your pricing model around maintenance and coaching, because gosh, we've done some and we've actually backed off because it's so expensive. It always seemed like it had to be so expensive to pay for all the time that goes into this maintenance and coaching. I'm wondering if you could break down what pricing looks like for your clients on those services.
Absolutely. There's two things I would say. One, in the early years, we charged everyone time and materials because that was like for us the safest thing to do. And that also helped get us a lot of that early data of, oh, when you go and do this type of project, you end up buying this much stuff and it actually ends up taking this much time. And only after 3 or 4 years did we transition to like a fixed price for maintenance. And our goal was we really wanted to transition to a fixed price because we just thought it would make people more comfortable because it wouldn't be like, hey, my bill this month was 300, then it was 400 the next month. Like, what the heck's going on? If we got to a place where we could charge them for the whole season, then we could charge them the exact same amount every single month, which people were more comfortable with. They can understand, and also allows you to set them up on automatic payment, which is a huge deal because then you can just be like, hey, the maintenance season is about to start. Click this button. Now, like your bank account's just going to send me money every month and you never have to think about it again. And neither do I.
Dang, that's huge.
Yeah. And that's honestly amazing because like in the early days, we spent so much time in the off season chasing people down for open invoices. It was terrible. It messed up our books. And then it was like every March when we were starting over, we'd have to be like, we can't come until you pay us for last year. And it was stressful for us and the clients. And at this point, again, like I think we're fortunate in that we've been around for so long. And so in a way, like the power dynamic is in our favor in that if someone is like really grouchy about like their maintenance costs, we just stop working with them. We're like, okay, like it's probably not the right program for you. This is how much it costs us to do this. Like we want to pay our employees a living wage. We spend all this time in the off season ordering your seeds, planting your garden. We have to drive to your house all the time. There's this other work we do afterwards. So like we try to be as candid as possible with people about, in addition to the 45 minutes on site, this is all the other work that we're doing. And like some visits, and because we're able to charge for the whole season, some visits might only be 30 minutes, but at the end of the season, when we're cleaning up the garden, it could be 3 hours. But they and we don't have to worry about that. And we can just say, hey, we're there a lot in the spring. We're there less in the summer, and we're there a lot in the fall. And like it's spread out evenly, here's what it costs. Just look at this one number for the whole year. And that's all you have to think about. And that's, I think, really helped us.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That sounds like one thing that you're doing really well and that you course corrected and made a system work for you all and your clients. You had alluded to this a little bit earlier that mistakes were made in getting here, right? And figuring out your systems. I'd love if any specific stories or anecdotes pop out to you as like mistakes you made, ways you used to do things that were working out really poorly, and then you switched and revamped.
There's a balance between developing your skill set and being able to offer more services to people by taking on new things and also knowing when to say no. And I think one of the things that we learned is actually really appreciate it when you say no. So I think as a contractor, you go somewhere and because the homeowner like wants to keep their life simple, they're like, hey, if I just have one company do everything, I don't have to hire some other people. I don't have to do this other thing. But a lot of times it's better, again, for you and for them to just be like, you know what, that retaining wall or that like drainage system you want installed, we're not the right people to do it. On a best case scenario, you have a network and you can be like, hey, I know some people that do that really well. I will put you in touch with them. I'm not getting involved. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to tell you how much it's going to cost. But if you want it done, hire these people that specialize in that, which can be hard to do because you're saying no to money. You're not telling the client what they want to hear at that moment, but it's actually better for everyone. And I think like eventually the client realizes that you made the right call and they respect you more for being like honest and candid with them and not getting both of you into a big snarl where you're just in the middle of something and you're not doing it right, or you leave the site and then it turns out you have to go back and do it again because you didn't do it right the first time. And that's the sort of stuff we did early on. Knowing your boundaries and being honest with yourself and your clients, I think is huge. And again, is like better for you in the long run.
Yeah, getting that clarity of vision is just so key. Some of the other guests have talked about that. And in our mentorship course that we have going on right now, we had asked people to get clear on what kind of life they want this to lead to, right? We all have this dream, and it is such a different thing to go out and build gardens than it is to plant them. And it's a very different lifestyle to design them. And
Mhm.
I have stepped more into fatherhood in this phase of my life. And it's like being on the sales and design pipeline is so much more conducive to my lifestyle now, because it's I can work all kinds of crazy hours throughout the week as opposed to feeling like I need to be out on the job leading a crew, and it's such a different life pace.
Absolutely.
So I want to transition us a little bit. I'm curious a little bit about marketing. You mentioned image. You all have done such a great job with that. I know one of the things you've done is written as a garden columnist for the Seattle Times, if that's right. You've written books. How did you get to this place where you're just always inundated and y'all never had to worry about, do we have enough work out there?
Yeah. We were just very lucky at the outset in that we had an article written about us the first month that our business launched. And so I, early on in particular, was like out networking like every night. I was just like going to events. That's probably an exaggeration, but a lot. I would go to everything that I heard about and I would just talk to people, and everybody knew somebody. And eventually you start seeing a lot of the same people. And then you have a follow up conversation of, oh, like we talked about this thing last time. And then I ended up connecting with Bobby and he said this other thing. Here's his business card, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of it was that sort of just I'm out in public doing stuff all the time as much as I can be. And I was also going to the farmer's market every week. Sometimes there's like a really long lead time to something actually happening.
Yeah.
So like you can go to a networking thing and meet someone, and then it's like a year later, like you hear from them or you see them somewhere, and then they're like, "Hey, I have something for you." And like just being out there and meeting people, like for me, always paid off. And I was always interested in writing. It's just like a thing that I've done. That's another thing. Like in a way, we fell into we were constantly just people asking us, like, "Hey, I'm a beginning gardener. What book should I get?" And this like hopefully doesn't sound pretentious, but it just felt like there wasn't a book I could recommend to people. And so Brad and I just started talking about like, man, maybe we should just write a gardening book. And then we honestly, we just put the idea out there to some publishers. One of them agreed to work with us and we just wrote it, which was a ton of time. It did, I think, improve our credibility. I'm very proud of the books. I do think they're very helpful to people. When I think back, I'm like, was that the best use of our time? Because honestly, depending on what your goals are and for the business, I honestly would have been better off spending those hours making YouTube videos. All I'm trying to say is path is going to be different. And what I would have maybe done differently is like really thought about, hey, if I'm about to put 200 hours into something, what's the most valuable thing I could do with that 200 hours? Writing a vegetable gardening beginner's gardening book might not have been it, but I'm still proud of it. And so those opportunities, like locally, people know about those books. The Seattle Times needed a new garden writer. They reached out, so I started writing a column for them. It definitely keeps your name in front of people. I enjoy doing it. Very rarely do we hear from somebody who's, oh, I read your Seattle Times article and now I want to hire you to work in my garden. That all that stuff just being out there, your name is just circulating. People are seeing it and you're a known entity and therefore you're trustworthy. It all builds over time.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. We've really noticed, yeah, more and more people writing into us. I don't know how I found out about you guys, because we ask in every inquiry, like, how did you find out about us? And they're like, I've just known about you. At this
Yeah.
point, which of course, like, yeah, it takes years to get there, and you all have done a great job. But it is interesting to me the time that you put into those books, and then a whole video series on YouTube, maybe a year or two ago. It was really well produced. I thoroughly enjoyed them. And I'm just thinking, yeah, what's their play? What is it? We're all kind of spending our time thinking about how it's going to drive sales of something, because of course that's how we pay the bills, is like by selling things. What's your strategic thinking around putting so much time into books and those YouTube videos? A destination in mind? Is it another garden maintenance contract, or is it something else altogether?
Good question. If I'm being totally honest, some of it's just like a compulsion and like, I just want to do this thing and I have the opportunity. So I feel fortunate to have the opportunity. I guess my strategy has always been like, I want us to be known as the people who are the best at doing this. Maybe you can find somebody else, but if you want like the best edible garden in the Seattle area, like you should hire these people. And so I think doing things like a full length book gives you just like a lot of that type of cred. It's a huge time suck. You don't make a bunch of money from the book itself, but it's just street cred basically. And the podcast that Hillary did was the same thing. It's like you can't, and as you know, you can't just make a podcast if you don't have anything interesting to say, if you don't know the topic. So I think the books and the podcasts and the Seattle Times articles just give us this foundational credibility. At this point, that there's two things we're trying to do is one, just maintain that brand identity and brand awareness of a new garden just came up. These are the people to call. And a good example would be like 2 years ago, one of the big tech companies here built a big campus, the huge thousands of square feet of like a giving garden where like all the food is going to like local food banks. We had nothing to do with it. No idea this was even happening, but they just contacted us. We're like, we need you guys to take care of this garden. And we didn't have to sell them on anything. They just knew they were going to work with us. And so it was just like, we could tell them whatever we wanted. We could be like, this is how much it's going to cost. When that company built this garden, that was like the obvious choice for them to make.
Yeah.
So that's huge. It gives you this big basket of like stuff that can fall towards you. And then the other thing, what I'm personally really interested in right now is like the development of these garden tools, because I've realized that's just something that I'm just really interested in doing. Again, it's like a compulsion. This is what I want to do. Let's see if we can build like a market for it and add it to our business. And people will trust us because they know that we know how to grow food. And we've done all these other things that hopefully prove that we have something to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's transition us there. The fryer trellis, it's a very unique business proposition in comparison to what you've done before, which is so education based and installation based. You've created a product and now you're selling it to anybody with an address, right? So tell us about that trellis and why you feel that compulsion to bring that into the world.
That's a great question. Honestly, it came about through the work that we've been doing at Seattle Urban Farm Company. Like we've been building gardens for 15 years. And as when you build gardens, like to your story earlier, like I'm running around and like finding some hoops and some bricks and all stuff because like I have to like come up with a way of doing this. One of the things we were constantly doing was building custom trellises for people. And it just became this thing where it's like growing vertically makes sense, uses space more efficiently. It looks really cool. A lot of gardens are like a lot of crops are healthier when they're supported. So it's a thing you have to do anyways. And it always felt like we were either going to the store and finding stuff that was disappointing, or we were building something that was like pretty expensive because it was some custom woodwork, like cedar thing that then you have to install and not everybody has access to or can afford. And I don't know, it just got into my head. And you probably know a lot of like production vegetable farms, and especially in greenhouses and stuff, like everything is string trellised. People string trellis their cucumbers or tomatoes. It's just really easy. It works really well. And we years ago started setting up string trellises people with gardens, usually made out of wood. Again, like we built cedar trellises and use those. And then one day I was just like I believe in this idea and I want to see if I can make people believe in it also, because I think it's the best way to grow stuff. And so then it launched us into this long process of like, how do you start like a products business? And that's just where we're at. That's the thing when you work in a business for this long, like you have to keep evolving. At least I feel like I have to keep evolving to have a reason to get up and go to work in the morning.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you've made mention many times in the past, like how you've been fortunate to have that space in your life where at first you maybe had very low costs and now you've built a business that can support new endeavors. And that's all part of the evolution. It's hard to do the things you don't want to do if you don't have something exciting going on.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like once you stop wanting to run, your business isn't going to do very well.
Right. That's where I was going with that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So are you all doing the fulfillment on those, or is that happen through somebody else?
Yeah, we're doing it ourselves. We have some warehouse space and some staff that help do that. Best case scenario is we get to a place where there's some third party fulfillment service that we can use. But right now, we're doing it all the old fashioned way.
Yeah, I love it. Colin, I want to start to wind us down. I do want to touch base on this self-care piece really quickly because built a thriving business. You've got this massive reputation that is bringing in all this business. And I'm just curious about your wisdom for managing life now that you're older, you've got children now, and running this business and having a family. And how are you, the successful parts of your work-life balance, how have you structured those?
I think early on, we've always worked a lot. Anybody who runs their own business, I think, will relate to that. But I made this decision, and again, it wasn't like super strategic necessarily. It's just more like I get up and I work really hard until I just wear out. And I think it's just like the ability to recognize when I'm done for the day. I usually start working as soon as I wake up because I have stuff on my mind. But at 5 p.m., like I just check out. I don't pick up my computer. I don't look at my phone ever after 5 p.m. I'm just like, it's just called it. Just like a traditional, hey, close up at 5, like you're done. We might talk about stuff, especially Hillary and I own and run the business together. So obviously, like sometimes we talk about work beyond that, but we don't do work after that. I don't work on the weekends either. And in the early days, that was never the thing. Like we did work on the weekends pretty much all the time. We were 7 days a week. But it just reached a point, maybe 4 or 5 years in, where I was just like, I'm just going to set boundaries. And it's honestly probably the business would grow faster or be more successful if I was willing to do these things, but I'm not going to do them.
Yeah, I love the hard boundaries is continuing to come up with people. And it's so hard when we have the computers in our pockets and the temptation to do one more thing is always there.
Yeah. It's just that you're never going to run out of things to do is what I tell myself is I could do one more thing, but you know what? The task list is never going to end. So you just have to find, at least this is for me, like a place to cut it off and be like, yeah, all the other stuff I'll pick up there tomorrow.
Yeah. So one last question and more of just a fun, random one. I'm curious if there's any particular plant or crop or food that is getting you jazzed these days. You said you're a plant person, and I just would love to know what you're having fun growing or eating these days.
Oh, man. One of the things that we've been doing a lot of is Johnny's developed this whole new type of lettuce called Salanova. Have you seen that? It's like this hybrid between leaf and head lettuce. And I honestly have been meaning to read up on this, but there's also like a product called Easy Leaf, which is essentially the exact same thing, but I think someone else must have bred it so that they didn't have to pay Johnny's or whatever. So a handful of seed companies carry it. Anyways, we've been planting a lot of Easy Leaf, which it's pretty cool because it holds really long in the garden. When you cut it, you basically harvest it and all the leaves fall off. So it's like a leaf, like a baby mix coming from a head. But the other thing about it is it's like the quality of the lettuce is amazing. And I don't know why, but like the leaf texture is amazing. Like it holds really well. It's just some of the best tasting lettuce I feel like I've had in a while. So if you we've been planting just like as many different types of Easy Leaf as we can, mixing them together. And yeah, it's been awesome. And the main thing is it seems to hold in the garden so much better than either a baby mix or a lot of types of head lettuce. So I'm super stoked on that. Yeah. Have you tried that?
I think so. Does High Mowing Seeds sell it?
We've been getting it from Territorial, I think. I know like
Okay.
West Coast Seed, Territorial. Those are both out here on the West Coast, but Pie Mowing probably has it, but
Yeah.
I can't say offhand. Yeah.
We've mostly just done Salanova from Johnny's because just a Johnny's fanboy. But and Salanova has been phenomenal. Is it just more expensive seed? Is that why you're not getting the Salanova itself?
I think so. I think Salanova is just more expensive. And not to throw shade on Johnny's, we buy stuff from Johnny's all the time. Most of our seeds come from Fedco. That's like kind of our favorite seed company. But second to that, maybe is Johnny's and Territorial.
Yeah, that's great to have. Yeah, some of those favorite seed standout companies because we Foodscapers need to be partnering, I think, more with seed companies. I feel like we're a hidden market for them and an emerging one that they could be thinking more about because we're the garden advocates of our cities. We're the ones doing all the networking. We're doing the talks. We're writing the garden articles. We're doing the consultations. And people are asking us all the time, what seed companies do you like? And we have an opportunity to help spread the word in a way that there's like farms and home gardeners, but we're in between. We can scale the home garden. And so I just feel like there's like an interesting opportunity. I'll leave it there, Colin. I'm just thrilled to have you as a part of this Foodscaper community and helping to support people who want to do this kind of garden creation and garden education for a living, for clients. So just huge gratitude for coming into our orbit, sharing your knowledge and experience. We're tremendously humbled.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
If this podcast inspired you or taught you something new, it would mean so much if you could give us 30 seconds of your time, follow or subscribe to the Foodscaper Podcast. And while you're there, you could give us a 5-star review or rating. That would be so greatly appreciated. These small acts help us grow the Foodscaping movement. Thank you for listening to the Foodscaper Podcast. Keep growing. Big thanks to our official fruit tree nursery sponsor, Stark Brothers, for supporting today's episode. Stark Brothers offers a survival guarantee on their plants for the first year, and my company, Custom Foodscaping, relies on them every year to source quality fruit-bearing plants. Shop at starkbros.com. Big thanks to our official garden supply sponsor, Epic Gardening, for supporting today's episode. Check out Epic Gardening at shop.epicgardening.com.